Cycle Breaker Episode 4. The Rescue Crisis Rescue Cycle. When helping keeps us all stuck. Welcome back to Healing Both Sides. I'm Christina Fox. We're continuing our Cycle Breaker series, where we're looking honestly at the patterns that can travel through families and generations, and what it takes for us to finally say, "This stops with me." Some of these conversations will speak more directly to addiction and recovery. Some will speak more to the people who love someone struggling with addiction, and many will speak to both. But I want to make something clear as we move through this series. Cycle breaking isn't just about addiction. These conversations can apply to anyone's life. Maybe addiction isn't part of your story at all. Maybe your cycle is unhealthy relationships, poor boundaries, or never being taught boundaries in the first place, childhood trauma, abandonment, abuse, neglect, people-pleasing, anger, silence, constantly rescuing other people, avoiding difficult conversations, or simply repeating behaviors you watched growing up because nobody ever showed you another way. We all have patterns. Some were handed down to us. Some we learned by watching the people around us. Some developed because we were trying to survive what was happening in our lives. And some we've repeated for so long that we don't even recognize them as patterns anymore. That's why breaking cycles isn't about finding someone to blame. It's about being willing to look honestly at what we inherited, what we learned, what we've experienced, and even the patterns we've created ourselves, and deciding what we no longer want to carry forward. So wherever you're coming from, I want you to listen for your cycle. Because you don't have to have addiction in your story to recognize that something in your life needs to change. And some of these conversations may be uncomfortable. That's okay. We're going to talk about the things people and families sometimes don't talk about. We're going to have compassion for where these patterns came from while still holding ourselves accountable for what we do with them now. Because we may not have started the cycle, but we can decide what happens next. The Rescue Crisis Rescue Cycle. Today we're talking about rescuing. And I don't want this to become another conversation where we tell loved ones, stop enabling, and then move on. Because if it were that simple, people would just stop. Most of us already know we shouldn't repeatedly protect another adult from every consequence of their choices. The harder question is, why do we keep doing it anyway? Why do intelligent people who know better still answer that phone? Send the money? Pay the bill? Make the excuse? Arrange another treatment center? Call another probation officer? Give another ride? Provide another place to stay? Clean up another mess? And why do we sometimes find ourselves doing it again after promising? This is the last time. I think we have to stop looking only at the rescue. We need to understand what happens inside us before it. Because rescuing is often more complicated than. They asked for help, so I helped. Sometimes rescuing is love. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes guilt. Sometimes trauma. Sometimes habit. Sometimes family conditioning. Sometimes it's about needing to feel needed. And sometimes rescuing somebody else keeps us from looking at ourselves. The cycle usually starts with a crisis. Something happens. They're arrested. They're stranded. They're homeless. They're hungry. They're being evicted. They've relapsed. They're in a dangerous relationship. They've lost their job. They need money. They need somewhere to sleep. They need somebody to pick them up. They're crying. They're desperate. They swear things will be different. And your body reacts before your brain has even caught up. I have to do something. That's the part people on the outside don't always understand. They'll tell you, don't answer. Don't send the money. Let them figure it out. Meanwhile, your mind is going, but what if something happens? What if they die? What if they're assaulted? What if they're sleeping outside? What if they're hungry? What if this really is the time they need me? What if I say no and something terrible happens? And underneath all those questions is usually one enormous emotion, fear. So we rescue, and something interesting happens. For a moment, we feel better. They're safe tonight. The bill is paid. They're out of jail. They have somewhere to sleep. They're on the bus. They're going to treatment. The immediate emergency has passed. We can breathe, and that relief matters, because sometimes the rescue isn't only relieving their discomfort, it's relieving ours. That's why rescuing can become automatic. This is where I had to look at myself. When my children were struggling, I wanted to fix it. I wanted treatment arranged. I wanted transportation handled. I wanted the right decisions made. I wanted them safe. And eventually I had to recognize something. Sometimes when I stepped in, I wasn't only trying to remove their pain. I was trying to remove mine. Because watching somebody you love experience consequences is painful, sometimes unbearable. And when you're a mother, every part of you can scream, do something, but doing something isn't automatically the same as doing something helpful. That's the distinction I didn't understand for a long time. I learned rescuing before addiction ever entered the picture. When I look backward, I can see that this didn't begin with my children. I had already been taught what love looked like. My grandmother lived for her family. She had experienced tremendous loss in her life, including losing a child. And although I can never say exactly what was happening inside of her, I believe that loss influenced the way she held onto and cared for the people who remained. She had a saying, "You don't abandon your kids." And she meant it. If her adult children needed something, if I needed something, or if my children needed it, she stepped in. Money, bills, problems, responsibilities. She stepped in, and I watched that my whole life. Nobody sat me down and taught me. When somebody you love has a problem, make it yours. They didn't have to. I watched it. That's how generational patterns work. In other relationships in my family, rescuing may have been giving money or paying bills, which also looked like control afterwards. I did this or I did that, so you need to do this. Constantly telling someone what they needed to do, how to look and how to act, trying to influence choices, managing situations, trying to prevent others from doing something that somebody believed would hurt that person. When you're on the receiving end of it, it doesn't necessarily feel like love. It can feel suffocating. It can feel controlling. It can make you pull farther away. But now that I've lived long enough to see myself repeat some of those behaviors, I understand something I didn't understand then. Control can be another form of attempted rescue. If I can control what you do, maybe I can prevent the outcome I'm afraid of. And then I did it too. That's the part where cycle breaking requires humility, because it's very easy to identify what previous generations did wrong. It's harder when you realize, oh shit, I'm doing it too. Children need space to grow and become who they want to be. I tried to control their youth, what they did or didn't do, above and beyond the normal parent role I feel. They were taught to care about what others thought, how they looked, how they acted, what was unacceptable and what was acceptable, that in turn made them question their worth. All of that was passed down generation after generation. With my two sons, I tried to control their addiction. Of course that didn't work. I tried to control recovery. I tried to control treatment. I tried to control choices. I tried to arrange outcomes. I thought, if I find the right program, if I say the right thing, if I make this happen, if I prevent that, maybe I can get them where they need to be. And you know what? It didn't work, because I was trying to control something that ultimately belonged to them, their recovery. I could provide information. I could encourage them. I could support healthy choices. I could offer resources, but I could not make another adult decide. I'm ready. That decision had to belong to them. Rescuing can actually interrupt learning. This is where things get really uncomfortable. Consequences teach us things. That's true for everybody. You spend money irresponsibly and can't afford something. You don't show up to work and lose your job. You treat somebody badly and they stop talking to you. You make a poor decision and have to deal with what follows. That's how human beings learn. But if somebody constantly steps between us and the consequence, what happens? Sometimes we don't learn. If someone always pays the bill, if someone always provides housing, if someone always fixes the legal problem, if someone always calls the employer, If someone always replaces what was lost, the lesson gets interrupted. Not always, but sometimes. And this is why rescuing can accidentally help maintain the exact behavior we're desperately trying to stop. We remove the discomfort that might have motivated change. That's a brutal thing for a loved one to realize, because our intention was love. Intent and impact aren't always the same. This applies to both sides. I meant to help you. That's intention. My help allowed you to avoid responsibility. That's impact. Both are true. And this is why I don't like conversations about enabling that shame loved ones. Most people aren't sitting around thinking, how can I make this addiction easier to continue? They're thinking, how do I keep this person alive? We have to respect that reality. And then ask, is what I'm doing helping them move toward health, or simply helping them avoid today's consequence? That's a much better question than, am I a bad parent if I don't help? People struggling with addiction rescue too. This is something I don't think we talk about enough. We usually picture the rescuer as the sober mother, father, spouse, grandparent, or sibling. But people in active addiction can become rescuers too. I've watched someone I love struggle deeply with addiction while constantly trying to save other people, other adults, other people's children, people who were struggling, people who needed somewhere to go, people who needed something. And there's something heartbreaking about that. Because sometimes a person who cannot figure out how to save themselves can still desperately want to save somebody else. Maybe being needed makes them feel valuable. Maybe helping somebody else quiets their shame for a little while. Maybe focusing on another person's crisis means they don't have to look at their own. Maybe caring for somebody gives them a sense of purpose. And sometimes I think people give other people what they desperately needed someone to give them. Sometimes we're trying to repair an old wound through somebody else. Imagine someone who experienced abandonment early in life. Then later, they see somebody else abandoned. What might happen? I'll save you, because somewhere underneath that rescue might be, I know what it feels like when nobody comes. That's powerful and incredibly human. But here's the difficult part. You cannot heal your own abandonment by making yourself responsible for everybody who has ever been abandoned. You cannot heal your childhood by rescuing every child. You cannot repair what happened to you by becoming indispensable to everybody around you. Eventually, you have to come back for yourself. Animals can become part of this conversation too. I've seen another version of this that deserves compassion. People struggling with homelessness or addiction sometimes develop incredibly strong bonds with animals. And sometimes treatment becomes complicated because the program can't accept their pet. From the outside, somebody might say, you're choosing a dog over treatment? But that's an oversimplification. For someone who has lost housing, relationships, family connections, stability, and trust, that animal may be the one consistent relationship they have left. The animal doesn't judge them, doesn't bring up their past, doesn't abandon them, depends on them, loves them. And suddenly treatment isn't simply, do you want recovery? It can feel like, are you willing to abandon the one living thing that hasn't abandoned you? That doesn't mean treatment isn't necessary. It means we need to understand the emotional reality we're asking somebody to walk through. And practically, sometimes people genuinely have nowhere safe for that animal to go. If we want people to accept help, sometimes our systems need to understand the human attachments that come with them. Being needed can feel like being worth something. This goes far beyond addiction. Some people build their entire identity around being needed. The helper, the fixer, the one everybody calls, the strong one, the dependable one, the person who knows what to do. And everybody praises them for it. Until one day they're exhausted, resentful, overwhelmed, and have absolutely no idea how to take care of themselves. Why? Because nobody needed them to take care of themselves. Their value became connected to what they could do for everybody else. That's another generational pattern, especially in families where one person has always been expected to hold everything together. What happens when nobody needs saving? That's an interesting question. If you're accustomed to crisis, what happens when there isn't one? Do you feel peaceful or uncomfortable? Do you find another problem, another person, another situation, something else to fix? Sometimes we become so accustomed to being needed that peace feels like purposelessness. And that's when rescuing stops being only about the other person. We have to ask, who am I if nobody needs me today? That's a difficult question for some of us. Rescuing can become a way of avoiding ourselves. This connects directly to our last episode. Sometimes focusing on everybody else's problems keeps us from dealing with our own. As long as my child is in crisis, I don't have time to think about my marriage, my health, my grief, my drinking, my eating, my trauma, my loneliness, my dreams, my life. Their crisis gives me somewhere to put all my attention. That's not always conscious. Most of the time it probably isn't. But when we stop rescuing, we may suddenly find ourselves face to face with everything we've been avoiding. That's part of cycle breaking too. Helping and rescuing are not the same thing. This is where we need some practical distinction. Helping says, I'll support something you're doing for yourself. Rescuing often says, I'll do it for you. Helping might be, you found a treatment program and need a ride? I'll take you. Rescuing might be spending 3 days arranging treatment for somebody who has made no commitment to go. Helping might be, I'll help you look at job applications. Rescuing might be calling employers and explaining why an adult child didn't show up. Helping might be, I'll support your recovery. Rescuing might be repeatedly removing every consequence of continued use. But context matters. This isn't a rigid formula. Sometimes somebody genuinely cannot do something for themselves. Sometimes intervention is necessary for immediate safety. Sometimes helping with transportation or housing is exactly appropriate. That's why I don't like blanket statements. The better question is, am I supporting their ability to take responsibility or replacing it? Don't confuse a boundary with punishment. We're going much deeper into boundaries in our next episode. But this matters here. Stopping the rescue doesn't mean, now I'm going to make you suffer. That's punishment. A healthier approach is, I'm no longer going to do something that isn't healthy for me or you. Those are different. We're not trying to manufacture consequences. Life is pretty good at doing that on its own. We're simply deciding whether we're going to keep standing between another adult and every consequence that naturally belongs to their choices. The first time you don't rescue may feel terrible. I want people prepared for this. You might think setting down the responsibility will immediately feel freeing. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it feels horrible. You may cry. You may question yourself. You may stare at the phone. You may feel like the worst parent in the world. You may think, what if this is the time something happens? That feeling doesn't automatically mean you've made the wrong decision. Sometimes it means you're doing something completely different from what you've done for years. Believe me, it's not always easy. You're interrupting a pattern, and your nervous system hasn't caught up yet. The person you're no longer rescuing may be angry. They may accuse you of abandoning them. They may say you've changed. They may remind you of every time you helped before. They may tell you what a horrible parent, spouse, sibling, child, or friend you are. And sometimes they'll genuinely feel abandoned. We can have compassion for that feeling without automatically returning to the old pattern. Because if somebody has always experienced your love through rescue, your healthier behavior may initially feel like less love. That's why communication matters. I love you. I'm still here. But I can't do this part for you anymore. That isn't abandonment. That's changing the relationship. And what if they fail? This is the fear underneath everything. What if I stop rescuing and they don't get better? What if they lose the apartment? What if they go to jail? What if they stay homeless? What if they keep using? What if they refuse treatment? What if the consequence doesn't magically create recovery? That's possible. Consequences don't guarantee recovery. Boundaries don't guarantee recovery. Stopping enabling doesn't guarantee recovery. Nothing we do can guarantee another person's recovery. And that's the truth we keep trying to escape. We can change our participation in the cycle. We cannot control what another person does after that. That's why this is our recovery too. We sometimes hear the word recovery and think it belongs exclusively to the person with the substance use disorder. But many of us need to recover from our patterns too. From rescuing, from controlling, from hypervigilance, from believing everybody else's problem belongs to us, from believing love means fixing, from believing saying no means abandonment. And the person struggling with addiction may need to recover from rescuing too, from needing everybody to need them, from using other people's problems to avoid their own, from finding worth only in being somebody else's savior. Maybe both sides have been trying to save somebody, and maybe both sides eventually have to learn. I cannot save another person by losing myself. Breaking the rescue crisis, rescue cycle. So what do we do differently? First, pause. When the crisis comes, don't automatically react. Ask, is this an emergency requiring immediate intervention? Or is this a consequence somebody is asking me to remove? Then ask, can this person do this for themselves? If yes, maybe let them. Ask, am I supporting recovery or making continued dysfunction easier? Ask, am I doing this because it's genuinely helpful or because I cannot tolerate how I feel if I don't? That's a big one. And finally, what belongs to me here? Maybe compassion belongs to you. Maybe information belongs to you. Maybe encouragement belongs to you. Maybe transportation to treatment belongs to you. Maybe taking care of grandchildren safely belongs to you. Maybe calling emergency services during a genuine emergency belongs to you. But their recovery, their choices, their honesty, their willingness, their consequences, those don't belong to you. We can keep the love and break the pattern. That's what I keep coming back to. I don't want to throw away what my grandmother taught me. You don't abandon your kids, family members, or friends. I believe there was tremendous love underneath that. But I can take that love and make it healthier. We don't have to abandon them. And I don't have to rescue them from everything either. I can say, I'm here. I love you. I'll support healthy choices. I'll help you find resources. I'll celebrate every step you take toward recovery. And I won't take responsibility for choices that belong to you. Both can exist. Maybe that's how we change what gets passed down. We don't have to reject everything our families taught us. Sometimes we take what was loving, remove what became harmful, and hand the next generation something healthier. Maybe instead of, love means I will always rescue you. We teach, love means I will walk beside you, but I won't live your life for you. And instead of, if I can save everybody else, maybe I'll finally feel worthy. We learn, I am worth saving too. That's how the cycle starts changing. One crisis, one pause, one different decision at a time. Before we end today, I want to leave you with something to think about. What part of this cycle belongs to you to break? Not your child's part, not your parents' part, not your partner's part, yours, because we can spend years waiting for someone else to change before we allow ourselves to heal. But cycle breaking doesn't require everyone in the family to start at the same time. Sometimes it starts with one person who tells the truth, who gets help, who chooses recovery, who sets the boundary, who stops rescuing, who deals with the trauma, who says, I'm not carrying this forward anymore. And that person might be you. I thank you for spending this time with me. To connect, please visit ChristinaFoxAuthor.com. From there, you can explore my books, listen to the podcast, read the blog, subscribe to my newsletter, and connect with me across all of my social media platforms. Remember, you may not have started the cycle, but you can be the one who changes what happens next. I'll see you next time.